I'm ready whenever you are. Good morning, Cardinals. This is Lance Swanson, I'm the Communications Director. I'm live here from the high school this morning. We've got another exciting edition of our Cardinal Moments with it's our online edition of Cardinal Time, if you will. Should be an exciting day today, another good topic. Today we have Emily Hamstra. We're going to have her in just a minute. But first I'm going to throw it over to our wonderful Dr. Phil, our tech guy at the high school here, and he's got a couple of tips for you about our thing. Phil, are you there today?
I'm here.
Excellent.
So first thing, everyone, if you need any help, again, call 402-412-2899. That's the help desk number. The other thing is, if you're having any issues with the Chromebook, give us a shout. Let us know. One of the things that we talked about last time was if you're having trouble, if it's not turning on, hold the power button down, hit that refresh key on the keyboard. That'll do a forced restart. Do that first before you make that call and make sure everything's working, make sure everything's plugged in right. You will need to have your device as we go forward here with school because you're going to be doing it at home. So please give us a call and we'll make arrangements for you to come by and get that repaired if you need it, or get you a different device.
Can you tell them about the Wi-Fi available out there in the lot?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Lance. We've got Wi-Fi available out in the parking lot on the student side, on the west side of the building. And if you kind of get parked close to the building, and also the old pool building on the other side of the lot where the maintenance and the tech center are, if you get in those areas, you'll get your best reception. So if you need that, and also check with your internet providers in the area. They probably will be offering some discounts. So if you need to get Wi-Fi at home.
I put the heat map that shows where the best coverage is and where to park online, but I'll try and email that out to their emails too. So.
Okay, thanks, Lance.
All right.
Dr. Phil, yeah, I'll email that map out and information on where to best park out there in that lot to get the best signal here in a little bit. It's also, I shared it on social media. I'll try and put it out on our website as well. So without further, I'm going to turn it over to Emily, who's got our Cardinal moment today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of Self-Compassion Fridays. My name is Emily Hamstra, and I am the therapist at the South Sioux City Middle School, and I see the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade kids as well as a couple of high schoolers as well. So if you guys are watching, hello, and I miss you, and for those of you that we've been able to connect via the telehealth or on the phone, it's been great to hear from you, and I hope to be able to connect with everyone while we're all kind of stuck at home and managing this whole quarantine thing. So what we're going to be focusing on for these Fridays is the concept of self-compassion, and this may be a new concept to you. It was new to me several years ago when I first started studying it and researching it. About 3 or 4 years ago, I traveled to California for a conference on the cultivation of the mind, body, and well-being, and got to see lots of amazing speakers there like Deepak Chopra and Dr. Dan Siegel. And another speaker that was there, her name was Kristen Neff. And Kristen Neff researches self-compassion. And so that's who we're going to be using to go through our book. If you're like me, you enjoy reading maybe, but sometimes it can be hard to get motivated or to find a good book that can keep you your attention. So right now I don't think the libraries are open, and I'm not one to like to read on a Kindle or anything like that. So this is a way that you can go through the book with me and be able to read the book, but stop and start as you want. And, if you're able to be completely present and listen to the book, and just relax, that's great. If you listen while you're driving or while you're cooking, that's another option as well. So I'm just going to be pretty much reading from the self-compassion book. It's called The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. If you want, you can also check out selfcompassion.org. And on there's some great meditations and information, as well as a self-compassion quiz. So if you're following these videos, I would really encourage you to take the self-compassion, see where some of your strengths are, where some of the areas that you struggle are, and just learn more about yourself with an open heart and an open mind. At the end of each of our readings, there will be some exercises that you are more than welcome to do, and I would encourage you to do so. We've got a lot of time on our hands, so there's no time like the present to do some self-reflection. So, and I'll mostly be reading pretty much word for word from the book. There might be some times when, I skip some sections because it's not super important. So I'm going to get started. So again, the book is The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, Self-Compassion, and Kristen Neff is our author. All right, so the first chapter, as you can see, I'm a highlighter. I love to highlight and write in my books and underline and all that kind of stuff. It helps me to remember better, and it also helps me to take myself to the most important parts of a section. So, you may want to have a notebook or paper and pencil next to you as well, if there's some things that stand out to you that you want to remember. So we're going to talk about Chapter 1, Discovering Self-Compassion. It starts off with a quote. It says, "The kind of compulsive concern with I, me, and mine isn't the same as loving ourselves. Loving ourselves points us to capacities of resilience, compassion, and understanding within that are simply part of being alive." And that's Sharon Salzberg from The Force of Kindness. In this incredibly competitive society of ours, how many of us truly feel good about ourselves? It seems such a fleeting thing, feeling good, especially as we need to feel special and above average to feel worthy. Anything less seems like a failure. I remember once as a freshman in college, after spending hours getting ready for a big party, I complained to my boyfriend that my hair, makeup, and outfit were woefully inadequate. He tried to reassure me by saying, "Don't worry, you look fine." Fine? Oh, great. I always wanted to look fine. The desire to feel special is understandable. The problem is that by definition, it's impossible for everyone to be above average at the same time. Although there are some ways in which we excel, there is always someone smarter or more successful. How do we cope with this? Not very well. To see ourselves positively, we tend to inflate our own egos and put others down so that we can feel good in comparison. But this strategy comes at a price. It holds us back from reaching our full potential in life. Distorting mirrors is our next section. If I have to feel better than you to feel good about myself, then how clearly am I really going to see you, or myself for that matter? Let's say I had a stressful day at work and I'm grumpy and irritable with my husband when he gets home later that evening. If I'm highly invested in having a positive self-image and don't want to risk viewing myself in a negative light, I'm going to slant my interpretation of what transpires to make sure that any friction between us is seen as my husband's fault and not my own. It's not exactly a recipe for happiness. Why is it so hard to admit when we step out of line, are rude, or act impatient? It feels so much better when we project our flaws and shortcomings onto someone else. It's your fault, not mine. Just think about all the arguments and fights that grow out of this simple dynamic. Each person blames the other for saying or doing something wrong, justifying their own actions as if their life depended on it, while both know in their heart of heart that it takes two to tango. How much time do we waste like this? Wouldn't it be so much better if we could just fess up and play fair? But change is easier said than done. it's almost impossible to notice those aspects of ourselves that cause problems relating to others, or that keep us from reaching our full potential. If we can't see ourselves clearly, how can we grow if we can't acknowledge our own weaknesses? We might temporarily feel better about ourselves by ignoring our flaws, or by believing our issues and difficulties are somebody else's fault. But in the long run, we only harm ourselves by getting stuck in endless cycles of stagnation and conflict. So what's the answer? To stop judging and evaluating ourselves altogether. To stop trying to label ourselves as good or bad, and simply accept ourselves with an open heart. To treat ourselves with the same kindness, caring, and compassion we should show to a good friend, or even a stranger for that matter. Sadly, however, there's almost no one whom we treat as badly as ourselves. She goes on and tells a story about how she was introduced to the idea of self-compassion, and talks about the Buddhism background, and says if you're continually judging and criticizing yourself while trying to be kind to others, you're drawing artificial boundaries and distraction, feelings of separation and isolation. This is the opposite of oneness, interconnection, and universal love. And then she starts telling a story about, I remember talking to my new fiance, Rupert, who joined me for a meeting. And he talked about the concept of actually being nice to yourself. And she goes on with that story for a little bit. But the most important thing to get about through this section, she says, although thousands of articles have been written on the importance of self-esteem, researchers were now starting to point out all the traps that people can fall into when they try to get and keep a sense of shame, narcissism, self-absorption, self-righteous, anger, prejudice, discrimination, and so on. I realized that self-compassion was the perfect alternative to the relentless pursuit of self-esteem. Why? Because it offers the same protection against harsh self-criticism as self-esteem, but without the need to see ourselves as perfect or as better than others. In other words, self-compassion provides the same benefits as high self-esteem without its drawbacks. And later in this series, we will go over the difference between self-compassion and self-esteem, and moving away from that self-esteem culture and more into that self-concept, self-acceptance, and self-compassion. So what is self-compassion? What does it mean exactly? I usually find that the best way to describe self-compassion is to start with a more familiar experience, compassion for others. After all, compassion is the same whether we direct it towards ourselves or other people. So compassion for others. Imagine you're stuck in traffic on the way to work, and a homeless man tries to get you to pay him for washing your car windows. He's so pushy, you think to yourself, he'll make me miss the light and be late. He probably just wants the money. Maybe if I ignore him, he'll just leave me alone. But he doesn't ignore you, and you sit there hating him while he washes your windows, feeling guilty if you don't toss him some money, resentful if you do. Then one day, you're struck as if by lightning. There you are in the same commuter traffic, as the same light, at the same time, and there's the homeless man with his bucket and squeegee as usual. Yet for some unknown reason, today you see him differently. You see him as a person, rather than a mere annoyance. You notice his suffering. How does he survive? Most people just shoo him away. He's out here in the traffic and fumes all day and certainly isn't earning much. At least he's trying to offer something in return. It must be really tough to have people be so irritated with you all the time. I wonder what his story is, how he ended up on the streets. The moment you see the man as an actual human being who is suffering, your heart connects with him. Instead of ignoring him, you find to your amazement that you're taking a moment to think about how difficult his life is. You are moved by his pain and feel the urge to help in some way. Importantly, if what you feel is true compassion rather than mere pity, you say to yourself, there, but for the grace of God, I'd been born in different circumstances, or maybe had just been unlucky. I might also be struggling to survive like that. We're all vulnerable. Of course, that might be the moment when you harden your heart completely, your own fear causing you to dehumanize him. Many people do, but it doesn't make them happy. It doesn't help them deal with the stresses of their work, their spouse, or their child when they get home. It doesn't help them face their own fears. If anything, this hardening of the heart, which involves feeling better than the homeless man, just makes the whole thing that much worse. But let's say you don't close up. Let's say you really do experience compassion for the homeless man's misfortune. How does it feel? Actually, it feels pretty good. It's wonderful when your heart opens. You immediately feel more connected, alive, and present. Now, let's say the man wasn't trying to wash windows. Maybe he was just begging for money to buy things. Should you feel compassion for him? Yes. You don't have to invite him home. You don't even have to give him $1. You may decide to give him a kind smile or a sandwich rather than money if you feel that's the more responsible thing to do. But yes, he is still worthy of compassion. All of us are. Compassion is not only relevant to those who are blameless victims, but also to those whose suffering stems from failures, personal weaknesses, or bad decisions. You know, the kind you and I make every day. Compassion, then, involves the recognition and clear seeing of suffering. It also involves feeling kindness for people who are suffering, so that the desire to help, to ameliorate suffering, emerges. Finally, compassion involves recognizing our shared human condition, flawed and fragile as it is. The next session is compassion for ourselves. Self-compassion, by definition, involves the same qualities. First, it requires that we stop to recognize our own suffering. We can't be moved by our own pain if we don't even acknowledge that it exists in the first place. Of course, sometimes the fact that we're in pain is blindly obvious, and we can think nothing else. More often than you might think, however, we don't recognize when we are suffering. Much of Western culture has a strong, stiff upper lip tradition. We are taught that we shouldn't complain, that we should just carry on. If we're in a difficult or stressful situation, we rarely take the time to step back and recognize how hard it is for us in the moment. And when our pain comes from self-judgment, if you're angry at yourself for mistreating someone or for making some stupid remark, it's even harder to see these as moments of suffering. Like the time I asked a friend I hadn't seen in a while if she was expecting. We typically don't recognize such moments as a type of pain that is worthy of a compassionate response. After all, I messed up. Doesn't that mean I should be punished? Well, do you punish your friends and your family when they mess up? Okay, maybe sometimes a little bit, but do you feel good about it? Everybody makes mistakes at one time or another. It's a fact of life. And if you think about it, why should you expect anything different? Where is it written in a contract you signed before birth promising that you'd be perfect, that you'd never fail, and that your life would go absolutely the way you wanted it to? Excuse me, there must be some error. I signed up for the everything will go swimmingly until the day I die plan. Can I speak to the management, please? It's absurd. And yet most of us act as if something has gone terribly awry when we fall down or life takes an unwanted and unexpected turn. One of the downsides of living in a culture that stresses the ethic of independence and individual achievement is that if we don't continually reach our ideal goals, we feel that we only have ourselves to blame. And if we're at fault, that means we don't deserve compassion, right? The truth is, everyone is worthy of compassion. The very fact that we are conscious human beings experiencing life on the planet means that we are intrinsically valuable and deserving of care. According to the Dalai Lama, human beings by nature want happiness and do not want suffering. With that feeling, everyone tries to achieve happiness and tries to get rid of suffering, and everyone has the basic right to do this. Basically, from the viewpoint of real human value, we are all the same. This is the same sentiment, of course, that inspired the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We don't have to earn the right to compassion. It is our birthright. We are human, and our ability to think and feel, combined with our desire to be happy rather than to suffer, warrants compassion for our own sake. Many people are resistant to the idea of self-compassion, however. Isn't it really just a form of self-pity or a dressed-up word for self-indulgence? I will show throughout this book that these assumptions are false and run directly counter to the actual meaning of self-compassion. As you'll come to see, self-compassion involves wanting health and well-being for oneself and leads to proactive behavior to better one's situation rather than passivity. And self-compassion doesn't mean that I think my problems are more important than yours. It just means I think that my problems are also important and worthy of being attended to. Rather than condemning yourself for your mistakes and failures, therefore, you can use the experience of suffering to soften your heart. You can let go of those unrealistic expectations of perfection that make you so dissatisfied and open the door to real and lasting satisfaction, all by giving yourself the compassion you need in the moment. The research that my colleagues and I have conducted over the past decade shows that self-compassion is a powerful way to achieve emotional well-being and commitment in our lives. By giving ourselves unconditional kindness and comfort while embracing the human experience. Difficult as it is, we avoid destructive patterns of fear, negativity, and isolation. At the same time, self-compassion fosters positive mind states such as happiness and optimism. The nurturing quality of self-compassion allows us to flourish, to appreciate the beauty and richness of life, even in hard times. When we soothe our agitated minds with self-compassion, we're better able to notice what's right as well as what's wrong, so that we can orient ourselves toward that which gives us joy. Self-compassion provides an island of calm, a refuge from the stormy sea of endless positive and negative self-judgment, so that we can finally stop asking, am I as good as they are? Am I good enough? Right here at our fingertips, we have the means to provide ourselves with the warm, supportive care we deeply yearn for. By tapping into our inner well springs of kindness, acknowledging the shared nature of our imperfect human condition, we can start to feel more secure, accepted, and alive. In many ways, self-compassion is like magic because it has the power to transform suffering into joy. In her book, Emotional Alchemy, How the Mind Can Heal the Heart, Tara Bennett Goldman uses the metaphor of alchemy to symbolize the spiritual and emotional transformation that's possible when we embrace our pain with caring concern. When we give ourselves compassion, the tight knot of negative self-judgment starts to dissolve, replaced by a feeling of peaceful, connected acceptance, a sparkling diamond that emerges from the soul. So that's the end of our first chapter. Like I said, there will be exercises here at the bottom. So if you can see that, and maybe take a screenshot of it or pause. Whatever works best for you. I don't know if it's going to show up backwards on your screen like it does on mine. But basically, exercise 1 says, how do you react to yourself and your life? So the first, how do you typically react to yourself? Bullet point 1, what types of things do you typically judge and criticize yourself for? Appearance, career, relationships, parenting, etc. Number 2, what type of language do you use with yourself when you notice some flaw or make a mistake? Do you insult yourself? Do you take a more kind and understanding tone? Number 3, if you are highly self-critical, how does this make you feel inside? 4, what are the consequences of being so hard on yourself? Does it make you more motivated, or does it tend to make you discouraged and depressed? And number 5, how do you think you would feel if you could truly accept yourself as you are? Does this possibility scare you, give you hope, or both? And then the next section is, how do you typically react to life difficulties? So number 1, how do you treat yourself when you run into challenges in your life? Do you tend to ignore the fact that you're suffering and focus exclusively on fixing the problem? Or do you stop to give yourself care and comfort? Number 2, do you tend to get carried away by the drama or difficult situations so that you make a bigger deal out of them than you need to? Or do you tend to keep things in a balanced perspective or somewhere in between? Number 3, do you tend to feel cut off from others when things go wrong, with the irrational feeling that someone else is having a better time of it than you are? Or do you try to remember that all people experience hardship in their lives? If you feel that you lack self-compassion, check in with yourself. Are you criticizing yourself for this too? If so, stop right there. Try to feel compassion for how difficult it is to be an imperfect human being in this extremely competitive society of ours. Our culture does not emphasize self-compassion. It's quite the opposite. That no matter how hard we try, our best just isn't good enough. It's time for something different. We can all benefit by learning to be more self-compassionate, and now is the perfect time to start. So again, the website that she has is somewhere around here, selfcompassion.org, that has some exercises and the link to how self-compassionate are you to take that quiz. And I hope that you will join me next week for Chapter 2, Ending the Madness. And it's been quite an experience doing this for the first time, and I hope everyone is staying well and healthy and occupied and relaxed and all those I don't know, whatever this is supposed to be teaching us. And I hope that you're open to learning that and being present and patient with yourself and others. So have a great Friday, a great weekend, and we will talk soon. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Emily, for that great information. We really appreciate it and enjoyed that. I want to wish everybody a great weekend, and take some time, if you're students, to look at your email and take that survey if you haven't. We can't emphasize that enough. Obviously, if you're watching this, you probably have already taken the survey, so tell your friends and relatives to take the survey, get on the laptop, get ready to take online courses starting next week. I want to thank Adam for handling the video work and producing today, and Dr. Phil for doing the Valleyhead and letting us know about the awesome Wi-Fi available on the west side parking lot of the high school there. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.